So let's move into the third of the 11th of October trilogy of social work and philosophy nonsense.
It's
I wonder.
The pinnacle of the evening.
No, it's not. No. I think this is I think the two previous episodes have been really, really heavy. Been really, really heavy stuff going on, and I think the thing that I'm going to present is a bit of philosophical fun. Quite frankly, a bit of philosophical fun for us to think about the morals of the various things we do when we have difficult decisions to be made. But first, given that we've been at this trilogy recording for quite some time, I did wonder whether we need to introduce further beers or whether we're still on the same beers.
I think you're pushing us in a direction where we don't really have a choice. I think you've decided that we're going to introduce more beers. Just saying.
Absolutely. Choice is an illusion, as we were saying in the previous episode. So you haven't got a choice. You're going to introduce your beer. And I'm on the Citrus City Orange Pale Ale. This is a 6%er. This is a 6%er. So we need to raise it up.
You need to raise it up a little bit.
Work quickly.
We need to work quickly with this one, because if I get through this one while we're still talking, I may not be able to control me tongue.
Turn that around to this camera, please. Down South Brewing.
Sorry.
What?
Oh, sorry. Down South Brewing?
What's the link to the local area from that beer?
Right, Down South Shields, obviously. Down South Shields.
Brilliant.
Rather than North Shields.
Brilliant.
Down South Shields.
I want some.
But you know, I'm all over the North Shields thing now. With this Sam Fender. What a guy!
I've got a proper response to that.
Aye. He's a genius, and we may have to. We'll see if we can get him on. Do you think he'd come on Beers and Ideas and talk to us? Because I tell you what, there's some deep lyrics going on that album. Like, he's a good lad.
Well, I've only heard a couple of the tracks because because I can't get them.
Well, absolutely, because you won't pay for Spotify, will you? Because you're tight. But anyway, I'm
a socialist.
All right, okay. Well, anyway, I'm going to drink this Citrus Orange Pale Ale.
Sorry.
George, what? I'm going to go to George first, because you always bleed take the limelight. George, are you still
on the zero? Boring.
No, that's not boring. You see, we should not think about people drinking non-alcoholic beer as being boring. I mean, they are, but we shouldn't think of it that way.
Yeah.
But you know, because well, you'll have a better night's sleep than we're going to have. James, what do you want?
Well, I went for a change, and I went for a Brewdog, which is actually made by dogs.
You were on a Brewdog last time.
I know. Think what they do? They get the paws on the hops.
They get the paws and do that.
And then they make like that. And this edition is called Hazy Jane.
That's the one you were drinking before. You can't introduce it as though it's a new beer when it's the one you were drinking before.
I know, but you put me in a really difficult position, because I said at the beginning I've got 4 out the same box.
Oh, see, they're all here.
And then you're saying to me, like it's a new one because you're the director.
Right.
I'm trying to work with you, and
see.
It's just
we might need to go to the Brewdog place in Newcastle now.
Oh, let's do that.
So we could do a joke.
Maybe.
And everyone will laugh.
That's not a joke.
Maybe we could host a show from Brewdog. Maybe we could do a live.
Yeah.
I mean, there'd only be us there. Nobody would come, but yeah.
Do peculiar things like board game night and bloody Dungeons and Dragons and pizza night and stuff like that. So
who does? Brewdog.
We've got one sign language for a pub that won't be there yet. Aren't we cool?
Yeah. I think we should get in touch with the BSL people and see whether they can incorporate that into BSL, because I think that's
Brewdog.
You know, shall we go to whatever that is in BSL? Now, I should know really. I don't. Shall we go to? Oh yeah, go to Brewdog. Wouldn't that be great? Wouldn't it?
Blind dogs welcome.
Absolutely. Yeah.
What's welcome, George? Sorry, I missed that.
Blind dogs.
Blind dogs.
It's not guide dogs, George.
Dogs for the blind, isn't it? I think you have to get the terminology right.
I don't think dogs are actually blind, because there wouldn't be much of a service.
Service
I'm gonna stop this conversation before we get ourselves into trouble about naming various things.
Edit all that out.
Maybe. No, I'm not going to. I think we're all human, and we can get sucked down these rabbit holes from time to time. Anyway, before I tell you about the thing I'm going to tell you about, I came across this this quote, and it was this, and it was about marriage, and it said, "If your wife is great, you'll be happy. If she isn't, then you can become a philosopher."
Let's
So
think of that.
I don't know. I think we need to put that to the wise. We've all become philosophers. What does that tell us about the state of our relationships? Anyway, I just came across it. I thought I'd share that with you.
My wife doesn't listen to this, so yeah, I think so.
No, I don't think there's any chance of Christine stumbling upon this. But what I've been wanting to do forever. I think I probably mentioned this like in about episode 2, and I said we should do this thing, and Jamie was reluctant. I sensed George was on board, but I sensed a reluctance on Jamie's part to get involved with the trolley problem. And the trolley problem is a thought experiment, and we did thought experiments right at the start, didn't we? Plato's cave and all that kind of thing. So it fits into what we're doing, and it first appeared in a philosophy paper in 1967, written by Philippa Foot. So I quite like that because that was the year of my birth. So I feel I know unbelievable, isn't it? Can't believe it. I know this young face. So Philippa,
sorry to interrupt you, but this hill's actually younger than you.
Yeah, probably yes. So Philippa Foot, I don't know where to go with that. Philippa Foot in 1967 kind of outlined this idea that a woman then called Judith Jarvis Thomson then took in 1976 and turned into this concept of the trolley problem. So I'm mentioning women here. I'm going rogue because we normally talk about male philosophers, don't we? But here we are talking about.
I think George is getting
women.
Talking about. Did you talk about women philosopher George once?
No.
No.
We did the monkey thing. We did the journey to the.
Was that a male philosopher?
Yeah. Well, it was somebody who. Yeah, it was a male. Yeah. Right.
No, I welcome diversity, Stephen. Go on.
You're welcome. One for the feminists and the Jordan Peterson fans. So the most basic version of this dilemma is called the bystander at the switch. So the trolley or a train, if you want to think of it like that, trolley or train or tram or whatever, is on the tracks, and the trolley sets off down this track, and the bystander at the switch has a decision to make, because on the track further down are 6 people on the track who will not be able to get out of the way. The trolley, the tram, the train will collide with these 6 people because they're unaware of the impending doom. And the bystander at the switch can throw the switch before the train, trolley, tram gets to the points on the track, and can divert the train onto another track where only one person is unaware of the impending doom and will definitely be killed. So the moral dilemma here is you have a decision to make, because you can stop 6 people being killed, but in order to do that, one person has to be killed, and you are making that decision. So that's the moral dilemma that we need to contemplate in terms of the trial. But I don't know. I'm going to ask you, what would you both do?
I would say, because I thought about the trolley problem before, and I think by not making the decision, you're still making the decision. So if you decide to just not intervene and let this has nothing to do with me, and then 6 people die, you've still made that decision, which is resulting in the death of 6 people. So I would pull the trigger and kill the one, providing I didn't know the one. It wasn't.
Okay, George.
Yeah, same as score. Right? You've got skin in the game either way.
But what's interesting is, and Jamie starts to allude to where you can start to get interested in this, because he said, kind of as an aside, as I was moving to George, unless the other person was a family member. So that changes it. So if that was a family member, you would kill the 6 people instead of killing that one person.
Yeah.
So that's interesting, isn't it? So your morals can shift depending on the problem that's confronting you. You're happy to kill all 6 people. George, would you do the same in that scenario?
Well, it's very difficult. It becomes such a you just ever making it more and more difficult all the way down, isn't it? And increasingly more unlikely.
Because
You probably would. Well, ultimately, it'd be like if you were going to get hit by the train, would you divert the train another 6 people? Do you know what I mean? That's basically the where we're getting to ultimately, isn't it?
Yeah. So I suppose it's a case of if it's one of your children, there could be a million people on the other track. You'd put it that way. But if it was some distant aunt that you hardly knew, you may think, well, it's a will, there's a way. Do you know what I mean? I don't know.
Yeah. It's interesting. I did this with the students, last year's students, who second year students, and one of the students, David, I'm sure he won't mind mentioning by name, said, "Hey, I didn't set the bloody train off. I'm not making the decision." Do you know what I mean? I didn't start this whole scenario in motion. I'm going to do nothing. But I take your point that in doing nothing, you are actually making a choice, aren't you, to just let the course of events run. You are elected not to intervene. Oh, there's the dog. So yeah, it's
because
interesting.
then you'd have 6 people coming in saying, "Why didn't you do anything?"
Yes. So that kind of links us to the social work scenario that kind of comes into my head when I think of this, which is the allocation of resources. We're allocating finite resources here, aren't we? And do we provide a range of care options to these 6 people, or an expensive option to this one person? Because if you provide it to the one person, then the families of the other 6 people are going to say, well, why has my relative not received the care that I think that they need as well? And it takes me back to my time in practice where, and I don't know what it's like now, but I'm sure it's the same, where the cost of a month's care in some sort of group living scheme or whatever for somebody with a learning disability was probably 3 or 4 times more than the cost of the care for somebody in an older person's care home. And I suppose that still is. And that takes us back to the previous episode, doesn't it, where we were talking about kind of how care should be funded. And do the older people, do the 6 older people on the trolley track not deserve the same quality level of care as the one person with a learning disability? So that's where it takes me when I think about this, about those difficult ethical decisions, moral decisions that we make. When I was a manager, I had a budget of hours for home support every week. And if I got a request for a care package at the start of the week that was going to blow me budget, I might have been going back to that social worker and going, you need to reduce that because I need a few hours left just in case as the week goes on here. Or I could blow the budget and give nobody else any care on my patch, if you like, that week. And I think those are very real decisions that a social work managers, probably more than social workers, but sometimes social workers as well, were implicit in those decisions. Those are the decisions we have to make. Do we help more people with a lower level, or do we help one person with a higher level and leave people with unmet need?
I think it's a fascinating point. I'm really glad you brought that up, Stephen, because you mentioned that the difference between somebody with a learning disability in comparison with somebody with an elderly person, and then you can take it even further if you look at how much it costs to support a younger person, a child, in services in comparison to another person. Even though the amount of resources that is needed in the actual care of that person is probably greater in the adult service rather than the children's services, but the cost doesn't equate to the need. Yeah. Which to me, I find it fascinating, and I think some service providers have had us over a barrel for many years as a direct result of that. So I think it raises some really ethical problems, and I think, but I ask myself, well, where do those problems come from, and where do them values come from? Because we value children in society. In the Western society, we value children much more greatly than we value the elderly, and that's not the same in all societies. But that's a society we live in, whether we agree with it or disagree with it. So I think it leaves with difficulty if like kind of really breaking that down to where does it come from. And I don't know, we'll have some debate about this, but I think it comes from the old poor laws, the Victorian poor laws of the deserving and the undeserving. And yeah, so I think society will see children and people with learning disabilities as deserving because the circumstances haven't come about, generally speaking, because of anything they have done. It's been what's been given to them. Where those people who are older, you can see, you didn't, you haven't looked after yourself, or the some kind of judgment. And generically speaking, I don't think individually anyone's thinking this, but generically speaking, there's been some kind of judgment on, you're not quite as deserving as those because you've had your life, or you should have put some money aside for this time in your life, and this type of thing. So I think it comes from there, and so I think it comes from Victorian values, and so I think we need to challenge that, because you're right, we'll have a fine, but then it's practical, isn't it? It's because we'll have hundreds of thousands of people who need services, so we can give. So for every pound that we give over here to these people that give a really good quality of service, might only equate to a penny to each person over here, which would make no difference if you spread it out. So I think it's an absolutely fascinating topic, and I think it's something I think it needs to be discussed, because the amount of the allocation of resources is just so inequitable, and it's horrible. It's just horrible when you see it. It's just horrible.
Yeah, and it's inequitable on a playing field where there aren't enough resources anyway to start with. So not only is the allocation skewed in some way based on value judgments about the worth of people, but beyond that, we're on the back foot straight away anyway, because there aren't sufficient resources anyway, even if we shared them out equitably.
However, and what's coming to me head then? So I'm going back to prior to the purchase of provider split you mentioned in episode 1, but the community care app, before all that happened, when it was all in house. And it was how much it cost. It was how much it actually cost. So I work with people with disabilities, and I work with elderly people. When I was very much younger, and I don't think there was such a great divide. And I don't know. I wasn't involved in the strategic element at the time, but I don't think there was a great divide. It was, this is how much it costs to provide this person the type of care that they needed. And I think it's since we went back to George's point with Adam Smith, it's kind of made that division, that the market forces, and made that division, and pushing founders kind of looking for a way of going to base values that have been derived from Victorian values, and to how we allocate resources now. So, which tells me, and the worrying element is that we're going to continue with that rather than address it, because there's no political will at the moment to bring things back into state control.
Well, it's really hard. It's really hard as well. I mean, politically, how would you sell to the public, let's spend less on the children and more on the older people? I mean, that's. I mean, it is its values, and I think my personal view is an older person is just as valuable and valuable as a child is.
Raise your taxes, not to give people the wealth of inheritance, but raise your taxes or your national insurance or whatever you want to call it, and actually spend it on those people who need it. Is what I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. I do wonder as well whether, for all the money that's and this is maybe the case given what we were talking about in one of the previous episodes, is although more money is maybe spent on children and people with learning disabilities, for example, is the quality of care actually any better for spending that extra money? And I suspect it isn't really. So what's going on there? What's going on there? We're providing poor care.
Adam Smith's argument, isn't it?
George.
No, I think you've got to look at like the waste of local authorities or private companies. I suppose one of the waste would be profit, because that leaves the system. That's another person on the tracks, isn't it? That's another. So that's leaving the system as well, and not that can be endlessly efficient. I don't mean that. And I think the utilitarian point that it's the maximum good to the maximum number, it does have a sort of attractiveness to it, a neatness to it. But who does the calculations on those type of things? It's very hard to get away from that over, let's save this one person unless you've got a personal relationship to.
Are we limiting the problem to the parameters as Stephen set? Because the parameters should be changed, and I think this is where we sit in social work. Is we need to kind of be radical in approach. You mentioned radical social work earlier on, George. we need to be radical in our approach and say, look, we're not accepting the trolley problem, because the real issue is that we live in a society where we kind of focus. We focus on benefit fraud, and we kind of focus all our energies towards that. When I think the statistic going on at the moment is £1 billion a year spent on benefit fraud, which is eye-watering, which could really benefit social care. However, the real problem is the £70 billion estimated for tax evasion from companies in this country. So put that £70 billion in the social care system, and then we can have as many trolleys, as many tracks as we need without killing anybody. So that's my solution to it. Viva la share.
Very good, Jamie.
George.
I think I mentioned this before. I don't know if I mentioned this, Steve. Potentially massively radical things. One thing I've had. If you have the whole of child protection, how many children have died to the parents in the past 12 months? How many children have drowned at sea or in lakes or rivers? You could divert all that money. If you said, what's my number one goal? Oh, it's to save children from dying. Perfectly rational goal, isn't it, really? Because children do die. There's some terrible stories. What happens if someone had a strong evidence base to say, just close all the social care departments and we'll save more children by, I don't know, better road safety or water safety or food hygiene? We wouldn't do it. We'd protect our turf vehemently, wouldn't we? Even if there was.
What's that about, George? Why is that? Why?
Our turf. That's why. It's simple as that. Our turf. We know best.
Do you think social work said because the society needs were there? And it's I don't think it is about our turf. I think it's about what we talked about before. Is how we value children's society, or how we value the vulnerable in society. So we need to protect.
Yeah. But I suppose my point is, if you could do two things, but one was so radical, it would be the loss of something else. You'd want to defend yourself entirely.
Oh, that's really good, George. It really fits with the trolley problem, doesn't it?
Mm.
Save 100 children by improving the waterways, or one child by having good social services.
Well, it's like you had this conversation when you interviewed students in there. Why do you want to be a social worker? Oh, I want to help families. I want to do the best I can to save. I mean, you said, oh well, just send your money to India for the COVID thing and buy some gas. Don't get a student loan. Just send it out there. If that's what you want to do. You don't really mean that. You don't really mean that.
Just went there at the time when we said this. Just to clarify
that. Peter Singer proposes this problem with his, which is very similar in one of his books, and he says that, and I might have told you this before, but he says that I think he's American, so I think he talks about standing on the side of the river in New York. What's the river in New York? Come on, we must know that. Anyway, you're standing on the side of the river in New York,
Hudson?
and you've.
The Hudson,
it is the Hudson. Yeah, it is the Hudson. Yeah, because that's where what's his name? That actor that I can't stand landed the plane.
Oh, I quite like him.
No, I don't like him.
I'm not big.
Tom Hanks. Tom Hanks, not a big Tom Hanks fan. He's just always the fella out of Big for me. He just never does anything else other than that. Anyway, but Peter Singer proposes this problem, which is exactly what you've just said there, which is.
Sorry to interrupt you. I know you're in a stream there, but I think I need to
floor.
Yeah, I know you were in it, but I think this is really important. I got a message from Tom Hanks earlier on saying that he actually loved you.
Is that right?
Fact.
Really?
Tom Hanks is down to play Karl Popper in the upcoming movie as well.
Didn't he used to install radiators as well before he became a famous actor?
Fact.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
Round radiators.
Hanks is
Anyway. What was I talking about? Peter Singer. Peter Singer proposes.
We're talking about chimp. That's what we're talking about.
Jamie, man, shush, man. Just for a minute, will you? For God's sake. Peter Singer proposes this problem. And he says, you're on the banks of the Hudson where Tom Hanks landed the plane. You're on the banks of the Hudson. And you've got your $180 shoes on. You've got your best. You've got your fancy shoes on. And there's a child drowning in the Hudson. And you know you haven't got time to take your shoes off before the child will drown. So do you jump in and ruin your $180 shoes, or do you let the child drown? And everybody would say, well, you just jump in and you ruin the shoes because that's just money. And and he then says, well, okay, would you send $10 to save, to buy mosquito nets or whatever for Africa? and it's like, and suddenly people are like, why $10 would 5 do? Could I send $1? Suddenly you're doing that, and it's about the proximity of the problem, isn't it, to you? Because the problem is in front of you, you would do whatever it took. But because the problem is remote and distant from you, you start to make decisions in a different way, don't you? You know what I mean? It's that kind of thing. And I wonder if you would have the trolley problem where you had like 10 meters, you had 10 seconds to decide, would you make a different decision than if you had like the next 10 minutes to make that decision? Because you would eat yourself up with, wouldn't you? With kind of contemplation. Whereas maybe you might get the better response if you just made an instinctive response, I suppose. I've gone off social work there completely, but I just remembered the Peter Singer.
I've just remembered something from something I read once. The Railway Authority, who runs the rail lines, what they called? National Rail.
Capitalist bastards.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm gonna have to put one of them little E's now, Jamie, man. I'm gonna have to put one of them little E's on the thing to say there's explicit content in the podcast. Anyway, sorry, George, go on.
They've got a mathematical equation for rail safety costs versus lives saved. I can't remember. It's something like 270 grand. Like if they spend another 270 grand, they'll save another life. So
Wow.
so they had to, because let's have a think. Imagine on the tube. I know they probably don't run the tube, but like people falling on the tube or the doors opening, cutting people's head. I don't know, all these mad things. You can just keep adding more and more safety, but I suppose the increments just increase and get more. So the rail companies have had to answer this question with an equation, and they've got some.
Yeah,
Wow.
it's like the Conservative government, isn't it? It's like how much you sacrifice the economy to save their lives because of COVID.
But how would any rational person make that decision?
No,
You're
I'm
the real
not.
safety man.
I'm not
How
criticizing.
much real safety are you going to invest? Well,
Not
at the train's going 2 miles an hour, made out of rubber. It's just farcical, wouldn't it? You have to make this compromise at some point.
Yeah.
I would argue.
To get your point back to social work is about risk assessment, isn't it? It's like,
I was just going to say that exact thing. It brings you to risk assessment, doesn't it? And how much do we do to offset risk when risk is an inevitable part of life, really? How much do we realistically do? How much do we spend on managing those risks? And I mean, it was always a conundrum with older people, wasn't it? It was that working with older people was always that decision between whether somebody moves into a care home or whether they remain at home. And the decision was easy in a sense because it was made for us, because it was around money, it was around resource allocation. And once the cost of the care package hit the cost of care, the person had to move into care. That was the decision. When really, if we're thinking about how would we manage resources in such a way that it was fair, it would be, how much do we need to spend on this individual in order to give them the best life, wouldn't it? We wouldn't have older people cost this much to keep in care, people with learning disabilities cost this much, children cost this much. We'd have, well, we'll pay what we need to keep this person
but would the caveat
safe.
not be, this way you root back into it, as long as it doesn't hamper somebody else?
Well, absolutely, yes. And that and is that is that not going back to the previous episodes we've just done, which is, well, if it was under state control, then there wouldn't really be any sort of, I mean, there would be a ceiling, but there maybe needn't to be as rigid a ceiling as there is in the private sector, where it's about shareholder value.
Yeah, can I just a point I want to add to that, and just cut my head on the thought I need to add it. So
You can because you're waggling your pen about.
I am waggling red pen and all, red pen. So it's a case of, they say that the price of care to place them in an authority care home, which has been, it doesn't happen anymore. We know it doesn't happen anymore. It's so many hundreds of pounds in comparison to, or thousands of pounds a week compared to hundreds of pounds that we're getting in private care, which are £700 a week. But the underpaid staff who are in there are on family credit. So how much does it actually really cost the state? And is it better? So all we're doing is funding private companies. It costs the taxpayer is the difference in the taxpayer, because of family tax credits and stuff like that, to bump up somebody's wage, is probably the same. So all we're doing is taking resources from individuals who need it and giving it to private industry.
Yeah.
Rant over. Rant number 4 over.
Excellent point. I'll edit the silence out there so it looks like we just flowed into the next part of the conversation beautifully, or I might just leave that in and that bit. I mean, what's the we should draw to a conclusion here. What's the final points that you would make in relation to the trolley problem? Do you think?
I think it's an absolute fascinating problem. Because I hadn't really thought of it that way. Because when he was talking about, thinking, where are you going to go? This could fall flat on its face here. But then he introduced resources to, and how do you do that? And I thought, wow, that was brilliant. And where do you go with that? And how do you do that? And why would this trigger point? We have to allocate resources in such a way, and we are. And we always have been, and I think we're more and more at pulling that trigger now than we ever were. I can't see that getting any better. So I think it's we could talk for hours for it and look at a solution. The right solution would be to have as many tracks as we could, and we don't need to have that problem. But under the current political system, I don't think that's going to happen.
Well, I'm pleased you thought it was relevant, because I have had a whole year and a half or so to think about it, because I did suggest that I would do this about that long ago, and you just didn't look enthusiastic. So I'm pleased you found it helpful and thought provoking.
I was that old. I was dumbstruck. So you probably read that as like, he's not fussed on that, and I'm like inside going, wow,
wow. What a guy! It's like me with George's comment in the previous one. George, what are your final thoughts on the trolley problem?
I was just thinking there's Gene was talking. I think it's interesting if we look at the resource allocation point of view. I think the only way social work can move forward is a sort of a raft of different ideas, different approaches. But I think we're so reluctant to do that. Most of the local authorities just constituted the same sort of way. Yeah. But equally, the private providers, it's this profit motive, like going back to my Adam Smith point, invisible hand, just to chase the bottom profit. So really, there's no radical different operation of the tracks. Everyone roughly does it the same way. And I think it would take someone to do something radically different to say, I don't know, this might be right. We're not going to have any care homes. We're not going to have any care homes. We're going to do it this way and look at our results. But I think you probably need a bit more slack in the system financially to achieve those sort of results. I don't think we're going to be there in the next 20 years, unfortunately. So I think if I'm the director of social services in a local authority, you're probably going to do a little bit what they did last year, but 90% of it, rather than make any different lever pulls. Yeah,
absolutely. No, and I think the thread that's gone through this trilogy of conversations is we keep and George, you keep mentioning it mainly, and it's absolutely spot on, is this idea of radical social work. And I'm taken back to a quote that I use in the lecture I do on radical social work. I can't remember who it's by now off the top of my head, but being radical is pulling something out by the roots. It's getting down to the root problem and the root cause. And I think there's a reluctance, possibly because of the structures that restrict us or the systems that we're in. There's a reluctance in social work in general, not from social workers, in social work as a system, to actually grab the nettle and pull it out by the roots and think, no, we need to completely change this system in order to kind of move on from the position that we currently find ourselves in, which is, I suspect, that race to the bottom.